The United States of America is a country that was built by immigrants, and the vast majority of the U.S. population has ancestry that is not only from immigrants, but generally from immigrants that arrived here after 1776 for the most part. So why are Americans so unable to discuss this situation intelligently? And what do I mean by that? When Americans get into a discussion about immigration, I notice that there is an inability to distinguish between legal and illegal immigration, when in fact that is one of the most important, if not the most important, differences between the two. A legal immigrant has to follow a very, very lengthy process that involves waiting for documents in the mail, and it takes many years, and their job security, their life goals, everything can be put on hold while they go through this arduous legal immigration process. Whereas an illegal obviously is someone who did not follow this process and either crossed the border or overstayed a visitor visa if they came from a country that is across the ocean. So when Americans discuss this topic, they completely fail to take that distinction into account, saying, immigrants built this country, but yeah, why are you saying that it's okay to be illegal relative to legal? And then you have the second problem of putting all immigrants in the same skill level. The assumption that immigrants at the very bottom of the skill ladder, those who might be migrant farm workers, are the same thing as a surgeon or a scientist, or even better, someone like Elon Musk or Sergey Brin. That is ridiculous. This is a gross oversimplification of the issue, and as we have seen throughout many topics I've discussed on this channel, a lot of people are not capable of processing a two-variable equation, and that is certainly not exclusive to Americans. But Americans just cannot figure out the difference between a surgeon who came here legally and went through a multi-year immigration process and who could not bring their spouse over from overseas until they reached a certain stage in that process, so they were apart for years and things like that, versus someone who is just a migrant farm worker who did not even come in through the legal channels, but came through illegally. This is another problem with the two-party system, because before, immigration was not politicized very much, and this is in the early years, 1965 through 1985 or so. My parents were immigrants at that time. I am, of course, born in the United States, even though many people assume I am an immigrant. I'll talk about that later in this video as well, but this is the problem with how this debate occurs in the United States. Legal and illegal are not distinguished, and high skill versus low skill and all the tiers in between are not distinguished. And this is worsened further by the two-party system, because in the early years of immigration, 1965 through 1985, the period during which my parents also came to the United States, immigration was not politicized quite so much because it was unclear whether immigrants would vote overwhelmingly for one party versus another. But as a two-party system invariably gets corrupted and fuses into a uniparty that then seeks to grow the size and power of government altogether, immigrants figure out that whatever their value system might have been in the country they came from, which is socially usually much more conservative than even American Republicans, they will vote Democrat over here simply because they will get more handouts as a result, and therefore immigrants are about 70 to 75% Democrat voting. This then makes the government want to prioritize a greater share of immigrants who are more likely to vote Democrat. And while skilled immigrants also vote overwhelmingly Democrat, unskilled are even more tilted in that direction because unskilled are lower income and are less likely to be taxpayers. And this also moves the Republican Party leftwards, because how many times have you seen the Republican Party say that Hispanics are natural Republicans and so forth? From this chart over here, you can see that Asian Americans, the group that I myself belong to, used to vote Republican at greater incidence than even white Americans, well into the 1990s. As recently as 1996, Asian Americans voted more Republican than white Americans did, and now they have swung the other way to vote about 19 to 30% Republican, and that means 70 to 81% Democrat. And then you see articles from Republican outlets saying, hey, Asian Americans are migrating toward the Republican Party in large numbers, which is an absurd thing to say, because Asian Americans went from voting 60% Republican to 19%, and then the Republican conservative media, Conservative Inc. as they call it, is excited about 19 going back to 30. Forget about enticing Asian Americans to vote for the Republican Party. They used to vote for the Republican Party, and they decisively moved away from it. And the reason for that is because they have figured out the Republican Party doesn't really stand for anything and is the designated villain within the pro wrestling style system of government that we have, where the two parties are really just pretend fighting. If you come from an Asian country, you are more likely to be able to discern that readily versus a white American baby boomer who still thinks that their party is good and the other party is bad and so forth. But Americans are extremely inept at discussing the many nuances of the immigration issue, whether skilled, unskilled, and more importantly, legal versus illegal. Another ineptitude of the Republican Party. Right now, illegal immigration is at an all-time high, so it should be trivially easy to unite all legal immigrants who can now vote and their spouses and children against this practice, because the legal immigrants went through a process of following the laws and being in limbo for many years in their lives, and they should be extremely angry that there are people who don't have to go through that. But again, the Republican Party is not good at politics at all. It's a pretend party. In any WWE-style wrestling match, the designated villain is not supposed to win. He's supposed to look like he's fighting so that the match is interesting, but he is predetermined to lose if that is the designated outcome. So if you think voting Republican is going to fix this issue, if you haven't figured out by now that that is a futile exercise at best, then shame on you. But people in the future will evaluate how the United States has completely forgot its own origins and has dumbed down the level of debate to such a crude degree that people are not even capable of discussing intelligently that there's a difference between a surgeon or a scientist who is doing valuable work, who is high enough on the skill ladder that their presence does not suppress wages or anything, versus a migrant farm laborer. And then there's certain types of people who say there should be no immigration, including skilled immigration, because they don't want higher skilled people who are not white, for example. If you read those websites like Stormfront or the UNS Review and sort of neo-Nazi type websites like that, you will see this. Nothing offends them more than skilled immigration. They're more offended by skilled immigrants than unskilled immigrants because they can look down on the unskilled immigrants. They have difficulty looking down on someone who is a person of color but higher up on the income ladder and educational ladder than them. Remember, I'm not an immigrant. I was born in the United States, and I always saw myself as an American, especially since in my youth, that was the 1980s when assimilation was the highest. And it just didn't occur to me that I had to be different, or I should be friends with people only of a similar skin color, of which there were very few anyway to begin with. So yes, people in the future, when studying our time, will rummage through the rubble of our society and how we managed to screw up what was almost an indestructible society by having absolutely no concept of who is a desirable immigrant to welcome into our society, who needs to be kept out, the relationship between immigration and law and order, the relationship between immigration and the competitiveness of a society, what types of people are more or less likely to assimilate, and what assimilation actually is. A lot of young white Americans, especially young white American women, have de-assimilated from the value system that made America great. I'll call that an Anglo-Saxon Protestant value system. They are so keen on de-assimilating from that they will migrate towards anything that seems to be sufficiently different from that, including simply normalizing some of the strangest views around. I'll have more to say on this topic for sure, but quite a bit to think about over here. Now, if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much for watching.